Welcome back. I'm here today with Shane Greenstein. He is the MBA class of 1957, professor of business administration at the Harvard Business School. Shane, welcome to today's show.
Thanks for having me.
It's quite a mouthful, but I'm really glad to have you here on the show. And coming out from Harvard, you're here for an event here locally in the Bay Area, but thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Shane, if you could give background of, how you rose up to Harvard Business School as a professor there for the audience.
Well, I'm a Bay Area native. Went to Cal as an undergrad and Stanford for my PhD. Greenstein, Rogoff, Olson and Company put me through school. And then I was interested in the computer industry, did my degree in economics. Didn't think that was an odd thing at all growing up around here, but it turns out it made me unusual relative to most of my academic colleagues. And this thing came along called the internet, in the 90s, and by that point I was an assistant professor in University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I thought it was pretty cool, and so I got interested in that. I was interested in all the entrepreneurial energy that was going behind it, and I was in fact, among people in the academic world, I was among the very earliest economists to sit down and start to write about how the market was working, and I really haven't left ever since. I've always found more and interesting things to write about. And eventually, a few years ago, I was struck by how some of the stories had made it into the conversation and some had not, and so I sat down to write this book, in some ways to chronicle that really interesting period.
So if we look at this as a book right here, it's called "How the Internet Became Commercial." And now, going through and writing this, how many years did it take? For
7 years.
Roughly 7-year research project.
Yeah.
And as you went into this, the interesting thing is with your academia, you could have gone any direction with the private sector versus teaching. You did a piece on how the internet became commercial, yet you chose to stay into the academic profession. Well, why was that?
Originally, I like to write, so I was drawn to that professionally. I enjoy teaching also. And so, like a lot of people who enjoy teaching and writing, being a professor is a pretty nice job for both. It doesn't generally pay very well, especially when you're young, but it was so much fun, I didn't really notice. And then I have to say something else is, as I've stayed in the profession, there are a lot of times I could have left, it's true. Two things keep me coming back. I find it very invigorating to find new things. I have a calling card that lets me to look under all kinds of rocks in society, and you meet just some of the most interesting, fascinating people. And then the other thing that comes with this profession, you get to change the way people think. And that's a bigger mission than any individual can handle, but I absolutely enjoy that part of the mission, trying to help others think and change the way they think.
I want to drop further into that comment, changing the way, as we're moving into the realm of big data, now that we're gathering and collecting more data there, we're able to understand the human behavior aspect of it. When we look at this today, are there patterns that are emerging?
So the interesting thing, I say this in the book as well, but I've been saying it for a long time, an awful lot of what we observe today are patterns that we have seen in the past. And the more you appreciate how much repetition there is, the easier it is to identify what's novel.
Okay.
So for example, when very big things deploy, you tend to find patterns of hesitance because multiple firms have to cooperate together in order to make something work as a system. And getting that coordination to work is usually quite difficult. That's something you saw in electricity and automobiles, in airplanes, the internet, and we are seeing it today in big data. Disagreements about fields, disagreements about getting the coordination of different ways, different algorithms to get them to work with each other and have standardized ways of doing machine learning so that everybody can talk to each other. And then the other thing you typically see in when big things deploy is adaptation problems. It turns out big technology isn't useful out of the box typically. It requires much more investment to adapt to the needs of a particular user, and that kind of adaptation is very expensive typically. It's typically where most of society spends its money, as it turns out. And again, you saw it in electricity. You saw the pattern in automobiles. You see it in every major deployment. And again, you saw it in the internet. And if you look at big data, what's the big problem? You see it everywhere. Adaptation. Lots of firms have the data. They haven't figured out exactly how to modify it in order to find the value in it.
And I love that. Well, Shane, we're running up against the break. We need to take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages. I'm here with Shane Greenstein. He's a Harvard professor, also author of the book, How the Internet Became Commercial. We'll be right back after these messages.
I love fishing, with my family.
I think it would be easier to use a net.
It was so much fun.
The times when we are together, it makes it all the more worth it.
Having Dad teach them how to cast a fly rod, and
as long as we're doing stuff together, we're having fun.
Some people see a father and a son fishing together, while others see a succession plan. Welcome back. I've been visiting here today with Shane Greenstein. He is an author of the book, How the Internet Became Commercial, and is currently serving as a professor at the Harvard Business School. And Shane, in the first segment, we were getting in talking about the cost of adaptation. Mm-hmm. And you recently wrote an article for Foreign Affairs called "From Net to the Masses." Mm-hmm. In the article, you wrote that the internet became much more of what it would have been if crafted by a single industry or government agency. Instead, it was allowed to take on a life of its own, driven by the plurality of influence. Can you talk a bit about those influences that helped to create the modern internet?
So, the thing that's remarkable about the modern internet, even at its creation as a commercial network, was the vast variety of outlooks and opinions it drew upon. So if you go back, one of the things I found most enjoyable about this project, and one of the reasons it took so long, is that no single individual saw the whole thing, that there were multiple stories, and even finding a typical story was difficult. But you had stories at households, you had stories within business who were doing electronic commerce, you had stories within firms who were doing data carrier services. You had the dial-up ISP business, if you remember that, which became the broadband business. You had technological intermediaries, that is, firms whose business it was to help other businesses reach the frontier. You had software firms who had to figure out what parts of their software business had to change. Each of them had a different type of story, and even within category, multiple types of stories. So the internet draws on the energy from all of those different sectors, and it ends up touching almost the entire US economy. That's what I meant by greater than any organization could have provided or any even prescient architect could have designed.
Yeah, so when we're looking at adaptation processes, technology improves. The rate of adaptation also improves. Now, is it by the consequence of if you don't adapt quickly, you get run over and passed up, or what is the?
Well,
what's
that's part of
going
it.
on
Yeah,
there?
yeah, that is part of it. It's certainly familiar in the computer industry to have competition among featureitis. You know, that of features. That's part of it. Part of it is creative destruction. The entrant or entrepreneur who has a different vision of how to create value shows up, and the established firm has to respond and create value as well in order to remain viable. That's a different kind of process. That was very common in the 90s as well. There was another process that was common in the 90s is the gold rush phenomenon. I had a lot of fun describing that one, I have to admit. But the gold rush phenomenon, if you look at its economics, is a new piece of information. So it's a new discovery. Multiple people all believe they have an opportunity to make a similar discovery, and they all believe that they have to be early in order to do so. So everyone rushes in. That's where you get the rush. There were multiple gold rushes as well. The fascinating thing about the internet as a commercial phenomenon is that the gold rush didn't end right away. That it continued, and the reason it continued is because there were so many opportunities for adaptation.
You know, Shane, I'm running up against the break, but when we get back, I'd like to talk about what trends you see that will influence the future of the internet. Visiting here today with Shane Greenstein. He's a Harvard professor, also author of the book, How the Internet Became Commercial. We'll be right back after these messages. Since you can't take your wealth with you, spend time with your family. Welcome back. I've been visiting here today with Shane Greenstein. He's a Harvard professor and also author of the book, How the Internet Became Commercial. Shane, we were visiting on the future trends of the internet, but I want to get back to part of your book where you say on the internet, how the internet became commercial. You note that innovation from the edges played an important role in shaping the internet into a powerful commercial engine. Can you explain what you mean by innovation from the edges?
So the easiest way to explain it is to contrast it with the opposite, innovation from the center. So innovation from the center would be a situation where a single firm has a single vision of how technology should be deployed and requires all of its own assets to be used in its deployment. If you want to think of AT&T 40 or 50 years ago, that's a pretty good example. Innovation from the edges is different in those three respects. Multiple visions, so not a single vision. Multiple organizations, not a single organization. And multiple assets, not a single set of assets from one firm. So it's combining visions, organizations, and assets from multiple participants into a single network or accumulation of technologies that deliver services to end users. So innovation from the edges is a market process. It's necessarily a commercial process. It necessarily uses markets as a place to experiment, to learn what users desire, to try out new businesses and combinations of operations and pricing to find out where value lies. Innovation from the edges is necessarily something that relies on market processes to find value.
So do you think that the innovation from the edges is important?
Particularly
in
in
the future
the
of the internet?
Yeah, and particularly in the world we're in now, we're in a world of, if I could give it a label, dispersed technical leadership. Not a single organization has a lock on the technical skills necessary to address a new opportunity. And in that kind of world, you wouldn't want, I think society wouldn't want a single organization to dominate where things are going. We would want a setting or a situation where we get a contest among various different visions, where we get different opportunities addressed by different firms, and they have a contest for users, and users get to determine the outcome. So innovation from the edges is a setting in which we allow market processes and markets to direct users to the highest value. That's what it's about. It's it's a vision of how to take advantage of the wonderful thing we have in this country, which is just this wealth of opportunity and wealth of firms who can address them.
When you were working on this book, what did you observe about the innovation of business and technology leadership as the commercial internet evolved?
The amazing thing is how many amazing people there are. Just how many people contributed something in their own local market or in the area that they knew well. I was overwhelmed. It just the amazing number of people who provided something, found value somewhere, did something for their user base. You can also, when you interview, when I would interview people about their experiences, you could see them get excited. For many entrepreneurs, this was just one of the most wonderful, the highlights of their careers. It was just a wonderful period to try something new. It was energizing. It was almost a blank slate for many people.
So do you think the qualities and the skill sets associated with the successful tech leader in the 1990s or the early 2000s are still relevant today?
Yeah, actually, yes. It's too much to say that being a Renaissance man is a calling card, but it is true. I'd say the most impressive people in at least in entrepreneurship in these areas tend to have both some technical skill, some people skill. Almost are an anthropologist, has a feel for how organizations should be designed, is engaged with their communities, has an ability to work in teams. You still see the best entrepreneurs, the most successful leaders, have a little bit of everything, and they're not one-dimensional, and they're still open and curious, and really just wonderful people. And of course, the hardest thing about being in this area, it was true 20 years ago, it still remains true if you want to be at the frontier, is occasionally things don't work out. Experiences or tests of character. It puts people in situations where they don't know what to do.
I want to jump into
it's difficult.
So the snapshot where we're at today, the cloud is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
The rate of adaptation, we hear big data analytics. What do you see going on in today's world of the internet, and where do you see things heading in the future? Let's take like in a 5-year window. What you would
so first of all, we're going through two major build-outs in our network now. One is the smartphones are ubiquitous, and the other is in moving storage to multiple locations so that you can access things very quickly. And that's what the cloud is. The cloud is moving the storage of data into multiple geographies so that it can be accessed anywhere. We're in the middle of that build out. We're nowhere near done. And there are lots of things that have to be built to make the cloud work well. Costs have now come down enough that you can do major things in the cloud. We're still figuring out how to move video to major geographies, for example, because that's very data intensive. Streaming is very difficult to move to the cloud once you get outside of music. Music is okay. I think we figured that one out. Video is a little harder. 30-second clips is one thing. 2-minute, 3-minute clips in mobile settings is another thing. 10 minutes is pretty demanding. So we're still at that. That's where we are there. 5 years out, I expect the half an hour, the 20-minute half an hour barrier will be broken, and that's a pretty important barrier in the entertainment world. That holds the potential for mobile entertainment, and that's potentially a very large change in the allocation of leisure time. You don't have to be in your living room and you don't have to do anything in advance even to watch your favorite television show.
Did Al Gore invent the internet?
I got that question a lot. So chapter 3 starts with what really happened. The answer is he stumbled over his words, and then he got skewered for it, and lost control of the conversation. That turns out to be what actually happened. The book has a lot of fun with a number of the myths of the internet. I actually was one of the real joys of this was to track down what really happened at different times, to see in different corners of the country, different places where things emerged.
I think when you're looking at where we've come today, and we're in the middle of big data, analytics, migration to the cloud. There's going to be a certain process by which these all become into a more mature area. But 5 years from now, where do you see things at? And do you see new frontiers evolving as a result of the continued advancements of technology? Or
yeah, streaming is a big thing in entertainment. We're not anywhere near done with figuring out how to deploy streaming. In business processes, we're not anywhere near done in figuring out how to use big data to inform decision making. Big data in decision making has been deployed in some ways in advertising online. That's been the first uses. There are multiple opportunities in operations that haven't been used and fully deployed. Multiple opportunities that are starting to be recognized in distribution and marketing, and then just the operations of distribution and reshelving, for example, and anticipating demand before it emerges. Those are pretty important. In healthcare, big data it's an enormous frontier. Everything from precision medicine, which I think has more like a 10-year clock on it. Where we're going to use big data to understand patterns at the country level that a doctor would not otherwise see at its local level.
It's interesting when in the 80s when they had the big breakup of Ma Bell, and they say, we got a phone company, it works, the service is there, and then you broke it into the multiple smaller Ma Bells, and with that transition and the technological advancements, we found that it had a great platform for change in the internet. When you look at what's transitioning today, and I'm going to pick an area like healthcare, medical device industries, the drug pharmaceutical industries, they all have this somewhat protective attitude of we don't want our model to really change. But will big data, will the analytics, will it make it more difficult for them to say we're not going to change to the future?
I think healthcare is one area where you can see the potential for a lot of change in processes, but because of the privacy issues and the security issues, government will be involved everywhere in the world, and that will tend to slow down change and will tend to help the established players. Things like medical devices where you have a lighter government hand. You have some regulatory hand, but it's lighter. Actually, I think you'll see lots of change there, exactly because things can move very quickly and that surprise established firms. That's a place where you'll see things in banking. We're already starting to see big changes, especially in the developing world. The movement of the digitization of banking in the developing world is bringing developing economies into the modern financial world really quickly, and that has huge consequences. Positive consequences, because in principle hundreds of millions of people can come out of poverty. That's a big thing also.
Okay, Shane, in your book, How the Internet Became Commercial, you reflect on a lot of stories. So I want to go back to one of the first stories you tell about the antitrust case you had simultaneous with AT&T and IBM, and how that influenced the ability for the deregulation to allow the internet to move forward. So.
Yeah, so Bill Baxter, who was a professor at Stanford, took a sabbatical in order to be chief of antitrust at the Department of Justice. And due to recusals, he drew the assignment to go to the Reagan White House and explain to President Reagan and his staff what was about to happen. He went over and made the presentation, break up AT&T, close the IBM case. And he gets done with his presentation. There's silence. Nobody says anything. Then President Reagan has a question. He says, "Will the phones still work?" Bill Baxter replies, "Yes, sir, they still will work." Then there's silence, nothing else. And Baxter's really caught up in the moment. And that was it. He's told to leave. So he's on the way back to the Department of Justice. And then he realized he'd gotten so caught up in the moment that he forgot to ask, do I have a definite yes or a definite no? And that's the one place where he needed a definite yes. And so he debated with himself, is the absence of a definite no the same as a yes? And he eventually convinced himself it was, and which it was. As a matter of fact, it was, and went ahead. So that's the first story in the book, because that's just a wonderful, wonderful story.
Yeah, so we've come a long way with where we are today, and one of the big areas that we're trying to build out, and we'll eventually get there, but it's the area of Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. And you did some research in this area when.
Yeah, so Wi-Fi had a really long, circuitous route to us today. The person who first proposed it inside the FCC lost his job over his proposal. And then there was a committee at the IEEE of engineers who designed what we now use today, called 802.11b. Okay, so that's just for the nerds out there. That's what it was. And I interviewed them and finding out their story of how that came to be. The best part of this story is 802.11b is designed. They finally got it out there. After 18 years of hard work, there's something available, and then you have to get someone to build it. Well, as it turns out, Steve Jobs heard about it. He had just been reappointed back as president of CEO of Apple. He'd just come back. He contacts Lucent Equipment. They set up a meeting, and Jobs being Jobs, he just dominates the meeting, and as it turns out, it's a longer story in the book, mm-hmm. but the very funny part is the way it ends, where he just declares to everyone, he doesn't have any more patience. It's clear, and he just says, "Look, I need this card from you for $50. I'm going to sell it for $100. Hi," and he leaves. and everyone in the room is, wait a minute. Well, anyway, they ended up doing this, and that is the origin of the Apple Airport, the very first commercial Wi-Fi product ever.
What year was that?
That would have been 1999. when it was the first prototypes were deployed. And that's just a wonderful story. And then what happens after that is Michael Dell gets really upset because he's been beaten by Apple. And then he gets into this big to-do, and actually Dell becomes the second Wi-Fi product in the world, and that kicks off the market.
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come, and
Yeah.
now we're much different level. With trying to get our videos to work. And,
Yes. Yeah. So I'd say one of the most fun was just finding these parallels and stories just across very different parts that built the internet. It was so much fun to see people in these different places.
Well, Shane, I'm out of time today. It's been a pleasure having you here
It
on
has been great.
today's show. Been visiting here today with Shane Greenstein. He's a Harvard professor and author of the book How the Internet Became Commercial. Thanks for joining us here on America Dreams, and join us next week right here on this station.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Good having you.